Right now, I mean, the headlines are just screaming about this white-collar apocalypse.
Oh, yeah, it's everywhere.
Mass layoffs, the end of human labor, basically this looming obsolescence for anyone whose job involves, sitting at a keyboard.
Right. The anxiety is totally off the chart.
But if you walk into Silicon Valley today, like if you talk to the engineers, the architects, and the leaders who are actually building these foundational models, they're experiencing something entirely different.
It's practically the exact opposite reality.
Exactly. They are riding this 17-year high in energy and opportunity. The excitement is just palpable. It borders on electric.
It really does.
So welcome to this deep dive. Today we are cutting through the paralyzing noise of the AI hype cycle. We want to extract a practical, grounded roadmap for the future of work, for education, and honestly, for human capability itself. Entirely for you.
Yeah, and to do that, we are synthesizing insights from some of the most influential minds driving this shift. We're looking at the philosophies of Fei-Fei Li, who, is widely recognized as the godmother of AI for her work in structuring the foundational data that made modern machine learning possible.
Which is huge. And we're also incorporating the operational realities from people like David Roger, the CEO of MasterClass, who is actively restructuring how companies function.
Absolutely. Plus, we are diving into the actual network architecture of the future, specifically pulling apart the concepts in Cisco's outshift models, which deal with how autonomous systems will actually communicate.
Okay, let's just unpack this massive contradiction first, because it is incredibly jarring.
Yeah, it really is.
How can the public be so paralyzed by anxiety while the builders are so energized? It feels like we're living in two completely different worlds. The public discourse is basically bifurcated into these two extreme camps, right? Utopia or doomsday.
And I mean, both of those extremes are just intellectually lazy.
Yeah.
They are narratives designed to generate clicks, not actual understanding. I mean, the utopian view, this idea that AI is this benevolent god that will usher in universal basic income and we'll all just paint watercolors on the beach, it's incredibly disempowering.
Right, because it assumes all structural friction in society simply vanishes overnight.
Exactly. But then the dystopian view, the whole Terminator scenario where human agency is totally erased, that's equally disempowering.
Yeah, it makes you feel helpless.
Both extremes effectively tell you that your individual actions, your adaptations, they just no longer matter. To understand what is actually happening, we have to examine this technology not as an entity with an agenda, but as a civilizational tool.
A tool, yeah.
Think about the advent of fire, or the printing press. Fire can cook your food, forge your steel, or burn your village to the ground.
The fire doesn't care.
Right. The fire doesn't care. It's an accelerant. We are the ones who have to build the hearth.
I completely agree with the fire analogy, but I want to push back hard on this for the skeptical listener right now.
Sure, let's hear it.
Because unlike a printing press, this tool mimics cognition. If a language model can write a flawless React component in 4 seconds, or draft a dense legal brief that would take a junior associate 3 days, isn't the fundamental cost of intelligence going to zero?
That's the big fear.
Right.
Oh.
If the machine can outthink us, or at least outproduce us cognitively, aren't we just structurally obsolete? There's this very pervasive narrative in tech circles right now that the cost of a thought is approaching zero. And if that's true, the panic seems entirely justified.
Well, that is the exact framing that Fei-Fei Li aggressively tears apart.
Well, so...
She actually calls the phrase, the cost of intelligence going to zero, an utterly irresponsible and reductive claim.
Irresponsible, wow.
Yeah, and to understand why, we have to look at the architecture of what we are currently calling artificial intelligence. What we have right now are predominantly large language models.
LLMs, yeah.
They are statistical prediction engines. They ingest massive amounts of text and calculate the mathematical probability of the next word, or the next pixel, or the next line of code in a sequence.
Which is amazing, obviously.
Highly impressive. And it solves incredibly complex pattern-matching problems. But it is not holistic human intelligence.
Okay, so what's missing?
When people say the cost of intelligence is going to zero, they're equating human consciousness purely with basic deductive logic and syntax. They are mistaking the shadow on the wall for the object casting it.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Human intelligence is deeply intertwined with physical, emotional, spatial, and perceptual realities. I mean, we have absolutely no scientific grasp on the biological mechanisms of intuition, or where true paradigm-shifting creativity even comes from.
Right. This is not just brain chemistry.
Exactly. It isn't just a byproduct of neural connections in the brain. It's informed by a person's physical interaction with the world, their cultural context, their emotional scars. We haven't solved the mystery of human cognition at all. We've just commoditized a specific type of cognitive processing.
So if I'm hearing you right, we've commoditized the ability to synthesize explicit knowledge, like
Yeah.
the stuff that can be written down. But we haven't touched implicit knowledge, the intuition, the physical context, the feel of a task.
Exactly. And this requires a really serious historical correction because a lot of people look at this and think, well, the Industrial Revolution automated physical labor, so AI is going to automate cognitive labor.
As the standard line.
But that reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of history. The Industrial Revolution did not automate labor. It scaled it.
Scaled it.
Right. It made human effort vastly more leveraged.
I want to explore that mechanism because I think it's crucial for you listening right now. There is this economic principle called Jevons paradox.
Oh, yeah, Jevons paradox. Perfect analogy.
Right. Back in the 1800s, William Stanley Jevons noticed that when the steam engine became vastly more efficient, we didn't use less coal.
We used way more.
Exponentially more coal. Because as the cost of running a steam engine dropped, the applications for steam power just exploded. We put engines on boats, on trains, in factories. It seems like we're looking at a cognitive Jevons paradox right now.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it.
If the cost of generating basic code or writing basic copy drops to near zero, we aren't going to need fewer cognitive solutions. The demand for software, for content, for analysis, it's going to explode.
Exactly.
We aren't going to stop needing human effort. The nature of the effort just shifts from generating the raw material to orchestrating the systems.
And the demand for cognitive solutions is practically infinite. It's constrained only by our current ability to produce them. So AI doesn't remove the human from the loop. It shifts the human from the role of a manual laborer to the role of a systems architect.
But that shift is precisely what causes the anxiety, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Because if you have spent your entire career acting as a manual cognitive laborer, just formatting spreadsheets, summarizing documents, writing boilerplate code, your specific workflow is being commoditized.
Yeah, that's a scary place to be.
The danger is that the zero cost of intelligence rhetoric causes people to panic and retreat. They hide from the tool rather than learning how to wield it.
Which brings us to the brutal structural reality of the labor market over the next decade. If the demand for output explodes, but the nature of the work shifts to orchestration, what actually happens to the traditional corporate hierarchy?
That's where things get really intense.
Yeah, and David Roger introduces a concept that I think is the most critical economic framework for anyone listening to internalize right now. He calls it the barbell effect.
The barbell effect.
Right. So if you picture a physical barbell, you have immense weight concentrated at two extreme ends and a very thin bar connecting them in the middle. The argument is that the workforce is bifurcating into these two surviving categories, and the vast, comfortable middle is going to be completely hollowed out.
Completely erased.
Let's unpack the two ends. On one side of the barbell, you have the top 1% specialists.
Right. These are your uniquely creative craftsmen. Think of an elite copywriter, a visionary architect, a master surgeon, or a truly innovative theoretical physicist.
The people at the absolute top of their game.
Exactly. If you are just a decent copywriter, if you sit dead in the center of the bell curve, churning out standard SEO blog posts in LLM can already match or exceed your output at a fraction of the cost.
Yeah, you're competing directly with the machine.
But if you are in that top 1%, your work is saturated with that implicit knowledge we just talked about. It contains a depth of cultural context, subtle emotional resonance, and lived human experience that a statistical prediction engine simply cannot replicate. The specialists survive because their craftsmanship is a premium, irreplaceable human product. People will always pay a premium for the absolute peak of human ingenuity.
But mathematically, we can't all be in the top 1%. Society doesn't function if everyone is a visionary artisan.
Yeah.
So what is the massive counterweight on the other side of the barbell?
The other end is populated by what we can call the high-agency generalists.
High-agency generalists, okay.
These are individuals who might not be the absolute best in the world at any single craft. They aren't the top-tier coders or the elite designers, but they possess an immense amount of agency, judgment, and systems thinking.
They are the orchestrators.
Exactly. They know how to leverage AI tools to execute a multitude of tasks incredibly well. They bridge the gaps between disciplines, they utilize various AI agents to build up the scaffolding of a project, and then they coordinate with those top 1% specialists to refine the final product.
To make this really concrete, let's look at the evolution of Silicon Valley product manager over just the last 5 years. I think it perfectly illustrates this shift.
Oh, it's the perfect example.
Traditionally, a product manager was basically a human router. They were a conductor of friction. They would write a product requirements document, hand it to a designer, and wait 3 weeks for a mock-up.
And then take that mock-up to the engineering team and wait 2 months for a prototype.
Exactly. Their entire job was managing timelines, unblocking communication issues, and essentially pushing JIRA tickets back and forth across organizational silos. They rarely built anything themselves.
They were administrators of process, but the modern product manager, the high agency generalist, is completely unrecognizable from that model today.
Right. They aren't waiting around for a designer to free up bandwidth.
Yeah.
They are utilizing AI to do what is increasingly being called vibe coding.
Vibe coding. I love that term.
Let's define vibe coding for a second, because it sounds like a buzzword, but the underlying mechanism is fascinating. Vibe coding isn't writing syntax, right?
No, not at all. It's essentially conversational software development. The generalist uses natural language to describe the logic, the visual layout, and the functionality of an application to an AI model.
Right.
The AI generates the code, the generalist tests it, spots the errors, and converses with the AI to refine it. They are operating at the level of conceptual architecture, not granular execution.
They can design a functional prototype, spin up a synthetic data set, and test user behaviors in a matter of hours.
Hours, collapsing a life cycle that used to take fiscal quarters.
That is just wild. The value proposition has entirely shifted. You no longer need to memorize the syntax of Python or the specific hooks in React. The premium skill is now judgment.
Judgment is everything.
It is the ability to know what needs to be built, the agency to command the models to build it, and the critical thinking required to evaluate if the machine's output actually solves the human problem.
But this paints a really stark, unforgiving picture for anyone who is just an average generalist. The person who is used to just clocking in, processing their specific queue of tasks, and clocking out.
Yeah, the middle of the barbell.
It reminds me heavily of the transition from physical paper ledgers to digital spreadsheets in the 1980s.
The spreadsheet analogy. That is incredibly sobering. And I think it is vital to understand the human cost of these transitions. Because when programs like Lotus 1-2-3 and eventually Excel were introduced, they completely obliterated armies of clerks whose entire job was to manually calculate columns of numbers.
Millions of jobs just evaporated.
And there was a significant cohort of workers who simply refused to adapt. They viewed the computer with deep suspicion. They wanted to stick to their physical ledgers because it was what they knew. It was where their professional identity was rooted.
Well, because learning an entirely new paradigm feels like a profound threat to your competence.
Absolutely. When you are an expert at the old way, becoming a beginner at the new way is deeply uncomfortable.
But the economic reality was merciless. Historical data from that era tracks the individuals who failed to adapt to basic computing. They didn't just experience a plateau in their careers, they suffered a lifetime income drop of over 20%.
20%.
And massive rates of permanent job displacement. But the statistic that is truly haunting is this. The mortality rate for that specific displaced demographic doubled in the first year of their obsolescence.
Wait, really?
Doubled.
Yes.
That is a staggering human toll. It's not just an economic transition, it's literally a public health crisis.
It was.
Yeah.
The profound stress of sudden economic irrelevance, the severing of community ties, the total loss of professional identity, it manifested physically. It destroyed them.
Wow.
And the reason we have to look at that dark chapter is because the AI transition is happening at an exponentially faster rate and across a much broader swath of the economy than the spreadsheet revolution.
The answer cannot be avoidance.
No.
Yeah.
Putting your head in the sand is literally a hazard to your health and your livelihood. The only viable path forward is to figure out how to cross the bridge from paralyzing anxiety to active adaptation. Which leads us to the core mechanism of that adaptation, practical agency. So how do you, the listener, actually become this high agency generalist? It starts with fundamentally redefining the word entrepreneurial.
Exactly.
Usually when we hear entrepreneur, we picture a very specific archetype. A 20-something in a Patagonia vest raising venture capital on Sand Hill Road, trying to disrupt the taxi industry or whatever. We view it as a corporate structure.
And Fei-Fei Li argues that we need to strip the corporate connotation away from that word completely.
Okay, so what does it mean now?
Being entrepreneurial is no longer about incorporating a startup in Delaware. It is now simply a synonym for having agency.
Agency.
It applies equally to a specialty surgeon, a K-12 public school teacher, or a freelance graphic designer. Agency is the psychological resilience required to command a cognitively advanced technology, rather than allowing yourself to be commanded by it. It's the refusal to accept the default tools you are handed.
I love that phrase, the refusal to accept the default tools. And David Roger provides one of the most brilliant, practical examples of what this looks like in the real world.
He really does.
He didn't just buy off-the-shelf enterprise software to manage his day. Over a single weekend, without a team of engineers, he built what he calls his CEO stack. He used AI to architect a suite of bespoke applications tailored entirely to his own personal psychological quirks and workflows.
Let's look at the mechanics of what he actually built, because it demystifies the technology so much.
Yeah, tell us about Dividify.
Right. He built this application he calls Dividify. He didn't just ask ChatGPT to write his emails. He used a technique called retrieval augmented generation, or ARGI.
ARAG. This is a crucial concept.
It is. He took a massive corpus of his own past emails, his memos, his specific communication style, and fed it into a vector database. So now, when he needs to communicate, the AI isn't guessing at a generic corporate tone.
It's pulling from his actual historical data.
Exactly. To draft responses perfectly in his own voice, matching his cadence and his specific vocabulary.
And beyond just communication, he built a custom productivity tool that addresses human psychology directly. He built a ruthless to-do list app.
Oh, this is my favorite part.
If a task sits on this custom dashboard for more than 76 hours, the application automatically deletes it forever.
Just gone.
I find this fascinating because he didn't build a tool to do his work for him. He built a tool to force his own decision-making. If it sits for a day and a half, the system forces a confrontation. He either has to execute it immediately, delegate it to a specific team member, or acknowledge that it simply isn't a priority and let it die.
He coded his own operational philosophy into a personalized software environment.
Historically, commissioning a bespoke piece of enterprise software like that would cost tens of thousands of dollars and take months of development and iteration. He did it in a weekend for essentially the cost of the electricity.
And this capability is not restricted to software executives. The true power of this technology is how it infiltrates the mundane moments of our lives.
Yeah.
Fei-Fei Li herself, one of the preeminent computer scientists on the planet, talks about how she utilizes AI during her weekend chores. She is the person responsible for doing the laundry in her household.
Right. And historically, she would listen to an audiobook.
But now she uses voice interactive AI. She engages in complex, highly technical debates with an AI agent as an intellectual sparring partner while she is physically folding clothes.
It transforms a tedious physical chore into a deeply engaging intellectual exercise. It's ambient computing. The intelligence is just available in the air around you.
Exactly.
But I want to hit the brakes here for a second because we need to address a massive pitfall. If I'm listening to this, my immediate takeaway might be, okay, I need to go vibe code my own custom dashboard right now. I need to generate an app to run my department.
Yeah, that's the temptation.
But David Roger issues a very stark warning about this exact impulse. He actively dislikes it when his employees just vibe code a dashboard.
He really does.
Why? If the tool works and makes them faster, why is that a problem?
Because there is a profound difference between superficial agency and structural agency. Generating a sleek user interface like the front-end dashboard is incredibly easy now. You can describe a beautiful data visualization tool to an AI, and it will spit out the code for it.
And it looks fantastic.
It looks fantastic for the first hour, but if that front end isn't rigorously tethered to the underlying architecture, if it isn't properly authenticated with the back-end databases, if it isn't handling API rate limits correctly, if it doesn't understand the actual schema of the business data, it is a house of cards.
Right, it's brittle.
Very brittle. The moment an edge case occurs or the data structure changes, the entire dashboard breaks. And because the employee just vibe coded it without understanding the plumbing, they have absolutely no idea how to fix it.
Just stuck.
True agency requires a fundamental understanding of the underlying logic of the systems you are building. You cannot just command the machine to paint a pretty picture. You have to understand the canvas.
So if someone is listening and they realize they need to develop this deep structural agency, or perhaps they are a manager trying to get a deeply reluctant team to adopt these tools,
Yeah.
how do they overcome that initial friction?
That's the million-dollar question.
Because if you just send an employee a link to a YouTube tutorial on prompt engineering, they aren't going to watch it.
Oh,
Or they'll watch it, feel overwhelmed, and go right back to their spreadsheets.
that is a critical behavioral observation. Sending a tutorial does not work. The resistance to this technology is rarely an informational deficit. It is an emotional block.
Fear.
It is fear of the unknown, fear of looking incompetent, fear of obsolescence.
What's the unlock?
The unlock, and this is a profound insight into human psychology, is highly inefficient human connection.
Inefficient connection. I like that.
You have to sit down with the reluctant person one-on-one at the same physical or virtual screen. You have to take a real, meaningful task from their actual workflow. Not a theoretical exercise, but a real problem they are facing that week. And you have to solve it together using the AI.
Which feels completely counterintuitive to the entire ethos of Silicon Valley. The whole point of software is frictionless scale. Sitting down one-on-one for an hour to teach someone how to prompt feels like a massive waste of executive time.
It does, but it is the only way to activate the mirror neurons and bypass the amygdala's threat response.
Ah, right.
When a reluctant user sits in a safe, collaborative environment with a trusted human colleague and they watch the AI synthesize a messy data set they've been struggling with for days, something clicks. The psychological barrier shatters.
The fear is replaced by utility.
Exactly. Once they experience that aha moment in a supported environment, they almost universally go off and begin exploring the depths of the tool entirely on their own. The bridge to mass adoption of artificial intelligence is, ironically, deep human empathy.
That is a brilliant paradox. But let's transition from the limitations of human psychology to the current limitations of the technology itself.
Yes, let's go there.
Because right now, everything we've talked about, summarizing emails, generating code, debating philosophy while folding laundry, is constrained to a very specific medium. We are living inside a chat box. We are operating almost entirely within the realm of language. And language, as miraculous as it is severely limited.
It really is. The current state of AI, these massive LLMs that everyone is fascinated by, is essentially just version 1 of the cognitive revolution. And it is heavily reliant on text. But language is, by its very nature, incredibly lossy.
Lossy, like compressing an audio file.
Right. Think about how much data is discarded when we translate the physical world into words. You cannot learn to shoot a basketball gracefully by reading a purely textual description of the physics involved. You cannot learn to ride a bicycle or navigate a crowded intersection just by analyzing syntax.
No, of course not.
The physical world contains an astronomical amount of geometric, textural, and kinematic data that cannot be effectively compressed into language.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this brings us to the absolute frontier of what is being built right now. This is where it goes from a productivity tool to something entirely different.
Yeah, this is the leap.
Fei-Fei Li is deeply involved with a company called World Labs, and they are tackling the next monumental hurdle, 3D spatial intelligence. They are moving AI out of the chat box and attempting to give it a fundamental understanding of physical reality.
And to grasp the magnitude of what they are attempting, we have to deconstruct what spatial intelligence actually is. It's not just a single algorithm. It's a deeply layered cognitive process. It relies on 4 distinct, interdependent pillars.
Let's break those down, because this is the architecture of how a machine actually learns to see the world. Pillar 1 is understanding.
Right. And understanding in this context goes far beyond just labeling a 2D image. It means recognizing objects and their properties within a 3-dimensional or even 4-dimensional space. The 4th dimension being time, or state change over time.
Give me an example.
So, if you, as a human, walk into a messy living room, your brain instantly performs a miraculous feat of segmentation. You instantly know that the couch is a soft, heavy object, the coffee table is rigid wood, and the glass of water on the edge is fragile and currently stable but precariously placed.
I don't even think about it. I just know.
Exactly. You understand the physical parameters and material constraints of the environment instantaneously. Current LLMs have zero concept of a room. They just predict the word couch is highly likely to follow the word living room. Spatial intelligence means teaching a model to comprehend depth, volume, and material properties from raw sensory data, like 3D point clouds.
Okay, so once the model understands what is in the room, it has to move to pillar 2, reasoning.
Reasoning is essentially building an intuitive physics engine inside the model. It is the ability to calculate causality within that 3D space.
Like plotting a path.
Yes. If you want to walk across that messy living room to reach the kitchen, you don't consciously calculate the geometry of your stride. Your brain subconsciously simulates the path. It calculates the necessary clearance to avoid the coffee table, the friction of the rug beneath your feet, and the kinetic energy required to step over a stray toy.
You're constantly reasoning through the physics of the environment to predict outcomes before you take an action.
Precisely. Getting an AI to possess intuitive physics, to know that if it pushes a round glass, it will roll, but if it pushes a square box, it will slide, requires immense computational power and totally new architectural approaches.
That leads to pillar 3, generation.
Right.
This is where it gets highly creative, right?
Generation is the ability to synthesize novel 3D or 4D artifacts in a digital space. It's akin to your mind's eye.
I see.
Even sitting in a windowless room, you can close your eyes and mentally visualize rearranging the furniture in your bedroom. You can generate a physical simulation of something that does not currently exist.
In AI, this is moving beyond text to image into text to 3D, using techniques like neural radiance fields or Gaussian splatting.
Yes, exactly. It's the ability of the machine to construct fully realized, physically accurate three-dimensional environments from scratch based on complex prompts.
And finally, the culmination of all of this, pillar 4, interaction.
Interaction is the physical manifestation. It is the deployment of understanding, reasoning, and generation into robotic actuation. It is the actual doing.
Going back to the laundry example, think about the astonishing complexity of folding a shirt.
Oh, it's incredibly hard.
The fabric is highly deformable. It doesn't hold a rigid shape. A human instantly knows how the fabric will drape, where to apply tension, and how to adapt if a sleeve is inside out.
Right. Getting a robotic arm to execute that, to interact with a non-rigid object in real time, adapting its kinematics on the fly based on visual feedback is one of the hardest problems in computer science.
What puts this all into perspective for me is the evolutionary timeline. We tend to view our ability to speak and write our language as the absolute pinnacle of intelligence. But from a biological standpoint, language is an incredibly recent, relatively thin layer of software running on top of our brains.
Oh, a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms.
Nature spent over 500 million years developing and perfecting spatial intelligence. Hundreds of millions of years of organisms learning to navigate complex environments, hunt prey, avoid predators, and manipulate physical objects. The evolutionary compute power dedicated to spatial reasoning is unfathomable.
Truly.
So we shouldn't be surprised that it's vastly harder to teach an AI to fold a shirt than it is to teach it to write a sonnet.
Precisely. Spatial intelligence is the deepest, most ancient form of cognition. Without it, artificial intelligence will always be a brain in a jar. It will never be able to truly design physical products that work or control robotic systems in unstructured environments like a construction site or a hospital.
Mastering these 4 pillars is the prerequisite for AI to actually enter our physical reality.
But here's the catch. Even if we solve the physics engine, even if World Labs perfects spatial reasoning, there is another massive architectural bottleneck.
Right, the network itself.
And this is where the insights from the Cisco Outshift paper become critical. Because it doesn't matter how smart an individual model is if the network architecture is fundamentally broken.
Let's use an analogy to understand how AI is currently deployed in the enterprise. Imagine a massive global corporation. They hire the most brilliant high IQ specialists in the world for every department. But there is a strict company policy. None of the employees are allowed to communicate with each other, ever.
It would be complete organizational paralysis.
Exactly. The elite sales agent spends 3 weeks closing a massive enterprise deal. They learn every intimate detail about the client's architecture, their pain points, their budget constraints. They sign the contract, and then they lock that file in a drawer.
And then what happens?
An hour later, the customer support team gets a technical integration call from that exact same client. The support rep answers the phone and has to start from absolute zero. Who are you? What product did you buy? What is your architecture? They share zero context, resulting in a maddening, inefficient loop for the client.
That analogy perfectly encapsulates the current fractured state of AI agents. We are building incredibly smart but completely siloed models.
Silos, yeah.
You have a marketing AI fine-tuned on copy, a coding AI fine-tuned on Python, a logistics AI predicting supply chain disruptions, but they operate in complete isolation. When a user interacts with them, they don't share memory. They don't share state.
The Cisco Outshift paper identifies this as the central bottleneck of the next 5 years. The primary challenge is no longer just scaling up the parameters of a single massive model to make it smarter. The challenge is interoperability. How do we get these highly specialized agents to actually talk to each other?
They need a shared protocol. Right now, if software wants to talk to other software, it uses an API, an application programming interface. But APIs are rigid. They require highly structured, specific data formats like JSON. If a database schema changes slightly, the API breaks.
The Cisco paper proposes a radical shift, moving from rigid APIs to what they call the Internet of Cognition.
The Internet of Cognition, it's a theoretical networking framework where autonomous agents don't just pass structured data back and forth. They pass semantic understanding. They share intent, context, and reasoning.
Imagine an architecture where the moment that sales AI closes the deal, it doesn't just update a database row. It actively synthesizes the client's emotional state, their technical anxieties, and their specific configuration needs, and dynamically passes that cognitive context to the support AI.
It's seamless.
Before the client even dials the phone, the support agent already understands the entire history and intent of the relationship. It is a hive mind of specialized agents seamlessly passing state across a decentralized network.
It's moving from a society of isolated savants to a highly integrated collaborative superorganism. And when you combine the Internet of Cognition agents reasoning together across domains with spatial intelligence agents understanding the physical world, you're looking at a reality that fundamentally rewrites what it means to be a human being operating in the economy.
Which brings us to the most urgent question of this entire deep dive. If we are entering a world where machines can reason collaboratively and navigate physical space, how on earth do we prepare the next generation?
The stakes are incredibly high.
How do we educate our children, and how do we re-educate ourselves to thrive alongside this intelligence rather than being crushed by it?
This requires a total, unsparing reevaluation of our educational systems, and we have to start by looking at the underlying economics of how we teach.
This is one of the most paradigm-shifting concepts I've encountered recently: the economic unbundling of the Ivy League education. Let's look at the basic structure of a modern classroom. Why do we put 30 kids in a room with one teacher? Or why do we put 400 college freshmen in a massive lecture hall?
Because it's efficient.
Well, we do it because we've convinced ourselves it's a good way to learn, but that is a lie. Decades of pedagogical research, most notably Bloom's 2 sigma problem, has definitively proven that the absolute optimal way for a human brain to absorb and master complex information is one-on-one, personalized tutoring with a subject matter expert.
But we don't deploy one-on-one tutoring at scale because of a brutal economic bottleneck. Human labor is expensive.
Exactly.
It is financially impossible for society to provide a dedicated doctoral-level tutor for every single student on Earth. Therefore, the physical classroom size and the standardization of the curriculum is dictated entirely by the financial constraints of the teacher's salary, not by the optimal learning conditions of the student.
I think of it like clothing. A bespoke, custom-tailored Savile Row suit fits perfectly, but it takes 80 hours of highly skilled human labor to craft, so it costs $10,000.
Right.
Mass-produced T-shirts don't fit perfectly, but a factory can churn out 1 million of them an hour, so they cost $10. For the last century, our public education system has been a factory churning out one-size-fits-all T-shirts.
That's a brutal but accurate analogy.
But AI completely shatters that economic constraint. It acts as a cognitive 3D printer that can manufacture that bespoke Savile Row suit of an education for the cost of the T-shirt.
The implications of that are staggering. The data is already showing that generative AI, when utilized as a personalized Socratic tutor, can replicate the efficacy of that one-on-one human instruction. It can adjust its pacing, its analogies, and its difficulty in real time based on the exact cognitive friction the student is experiencing.
It's taking an elite educational experience that currently costs $80,000 a year at a top-tier university and compressing it into a capability that requires maybe $100 a year in compute costs.
And it's not just radically cheaper, it is radically faster. Studies are showing that students using AI for structured, personalized learning are mastering complex subjects in up to 60% less time.
60% less time. That completely breaks the traditional academic calendar. More than half the school year simply vanishes because the friction of standardized pacing is removed.
But this creates a massive institutional crisis. There is a deeply ingrained reactionary instinct among many educational institutions institutions right now to ban these tools,
Oh, absolutely.
to force students back to closed book handwritten essays in an attempt to preserve the integrity of the old system.
And any institution that attempts to enforce that ban will effectively cease to exist within a decade.
Without a doubt.
The divergence in human capability will be too vast to ignore. If you have one cohort of students who are taught to use AI as an intellectual sparring partner, who are learning to orchestrate systems, vibe code architectures, and rapidly iterate on complex ideas, they're going to be operating at a cognitive velocity that is unfathomable to the other cohort.
And the students who are forced to manually write essays and memorize dates will be entering a barbell economy armed with the skills of the displaced spreadsheet clerk. The restrictive institutions will render their own graduates economically obsolete.
Because the ultimate goal of education isn't to pass a standardized multiple-choice test. The goal is to build capable, resilient humans who possess the agency to navigate a complex world.
That's the real goal, yeah.
But that brings up a really thorny psychological issue. How do we actually teach that resilience? How do we forge the agency required to be the high-agency generalist? Because our current societal structure works actively against it.
This is where we have to look deeply at behavioral psychology. From the moment we enter the educational system, we are profoundly conditioned to seek external validation. We are trained to operate within a praise mechanism.
We want the gold star. We want the A+ on the report card. We want the teacher to validate that we followed the rubric perfectly.
Exactly.
And then we carry that into adulthood. We want the promotion, the exceeds expectations on the performance review, the validation from the CEO. We map our entire sense of self-worth and directional bearing based on the positive feedback of authority figures.
But the leaders who are actually navigating this technological frontier argue that true agency requires actively, painfully unlearning that praise mechanism.
Unlearning it.
David Rogers speaks to this from personal experience. When you are attempting to build something truly novel, or when you are navigating a completely unprecedented technological shift, relying on consensus is deadly. Yes. If you only pursue actions that get you praised by the majority, you are, by definition, only doing what is safe, predictable, and obvious. And in an AI-driven economy, the safe, predictable, and obvious tasks are the very first things to be completely commoditized by algorithms.
So relying on praise essentially guarantees you will be automated. He realized that if everyone tells you an idea is brilliant, it probably means it's already a solved problem.
Exactly.
True agency requires building the internal psychological armor to pursue ideas that authority figures tell you are impossible, or foolish, or structurally flawed. You have to be willing to be wildly misunderstood for long periods of time.
But developing that psychological armor is incredibly difficult. How do you train a young mind to withstand the disapproval of the crowd?
This is where Fei-Fei Li offers a deeply contrarian, almost provocative view on something that is universally maligned in our culture: social media and the digital lives of children.
It's a very hot topic right now.
The dominant narrative is that screen time is inherently toxic, that the internet is rotting the minds of the youth, and that we need to return to a simpler, analog childhood. But she argues that the digital environment has actually provided a massive structural advantage for developing this specific type of anti-authoritarian agency.
She points to the concept of the heterogeneous world.
Heterogeneous world, let's explore that.
If you look at the environment a child grew up in 50 years ago, their worldview was effectively a monopoly. It was tightly controlled by a very small set of authoritarian gatekeepers. You had your parents, your local school teacher, your community religious leader, and maybe 3 network news anchors.
Right.
If those few authority figures agreed on a truth, that was the absolute reality of your world.
But the kids today are natively born into a completely shattered information landscape. From the moment they log on to the internet, they are bombarded by millions of diverse, conflicting, and often chaotic voices. They are exposed to a heterogeneous reality instantly.
And while that digital environment is undeniably fraught with pitfalls, algorithmic rabbit holes, and mental health challenges, it does something fundamentally vital. It permanently breaks the monopoly of the single authoritarian truth.
Wow, that makes sense.
When a child sees 10 different creators passionately arguing 10 different perspectives on a single issue, it inherently proves to them that reality is malleable. It proves that the authority figure at the front of the classroom doesn't hold the absolute key to the universe.
It forces the child to synthesize their own truth.
Yes. Realizing that their individual voice and perspective are just as valid as any other in the network. It trains the exact muscle of independent agency that the AI economy demands.
It's chaotic, But it's the perfect training ground for the barbell workforce.
Hmm.
So let's ground all of this. We've traversed an immense amount of conceptual territory today. We started by dismantling the utopian and dystopian extremes, recognizing AI as an accelerant rather than a god.
And we unpacked the ruthless economics of the barbell effect, exploring how the hollowed-out middle will force us to become either 1% specialists or high-agency generalists.
We examine the mechanics of practical agency, how to use techniques like RAG to build our own custom tools and avoid the superficial trap of just vibe coding a front end without understanding the underlying architecture.
We looked past the text box, diving into the evolutionary leap of spatial intelligence, the profound difficulty of teaching a machine to understand, reason, generate, and interact with the physical world.
We looked at the Cisco outshift models, envisioning an internet of cognition where agents pass semantic context rather than just rigid data.
And we confronted the necessary collapse of the industrial education model, realizing that to survive, we must unlearn our reliance on external praise and embrace the chaotic, heterogeneous reality of independent agency.
If you are listening to this right now, whether you are commuting to a corporate job or running your own business or managing a team, and you are feeling a potent mix of profound excitement and deep existential anxiety, what is the immediate practical starting point? How do you step onto the bridge today?
The most actionable advice is remarkably low-tech.
Let's hear it.
If you feel paralyzed by the abstraction of all this, do this. Find someone under the age of 25, a younger colleague, a nephew, a student, someone who is natively inhabiting this digital paradigm.
Okay.
Ask them to spend an afternoon with you. Ask them to show you on their own device how they research a topic, how they synthesize information, how they construct their digital workflows. And here is the critical part. Do not approach it with your established corporate preconceptions.
Don't judge them.
Exactly. Do not judge their methods against your legacy systems. Just observe. Drop your ego entirely. Allow the generation that is naturally adapted to this environment to be your guide. When you see the fluidity with which they command these tools, the fear dissipates, replaced by a tangible understanding of what is possible.
I love that. The key to unlocking our most advanced computational systems is ultimately just a humble human conversation. It is a massive amount to process. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a lingering thought, a question that pushes past the immediate economic shifts and gets to the absolute core of what it means to be human in this new era.
Consider this. If AI successfully democratizes elite education, essentially minting technical experts for the cost of electricity, and if the Internet of Cognition paired with spatial intelligence eventually handles the heavy lifting of complex logical architecture, coding, and even physical robotic interaction, what is the enduring moat for human beings?
What's left?
Right. If we are rapidly approaching a reality where literally anything can be built perfectly and instantaneously by a machine network, will the singular defining human trait of the 21st century simply become taste?
Taste, the curation of reality.
Exactly. When the cost of execution drops to zero, execution loses its premium. The only thing that will retain true, irreplaceable value is the distinctly human capability to decide what is actually worth building in the first place. The philosophical, emotional, and cultural judgment to point the machine in a direction that elevates the human condition.
Remember how we started this deep dive? We talked about how we crave technological shifts to be clean and legible, like a simple blueprint. But right now, we are staring into incredibly murky waters.
Very murky.
Maybe the goal isn't to sit on the shore and wait for the waters to clear. The waters aren't going to clear anytime soon. Maybe the goal is to accept the ambiguity, jump in, and learn how to swim in the dark, relying on your own cultivated agency, your empathy, and your distinctly human taste to guide you and your teams to the surface. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious.